All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started so that we have plenty of time for presentation and for questions and answers. So I'm going to do very quick introduction and short bios. Alex Smith, perhaps raise your hand, Alex, is a palliative medicine physician researcher and a professor of medicine in the University of California, San Francisco Division of Geriatrics. His research is focused on improving quality of life and patient-physician communication for older adults, particularly those with a limited prognosis. He directs UCSF's T32 NIA-funded Aging Research Fellowship. He serves as executive editor at the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, where I know many of you have published. You can find him on Twitter at Alex Smith, MD. And his colleague and my colleague, Eric Wydera, is a clinician educator in the Division of Geriatrics, also at UCSF, where he serves in various leadership roles. He directs the Hospice and Palliative Care Service at the San Francisco VA Medical Center. He's Associate Program Director for the Geriatrics Fellowship at UCSF. He's also on the Board of Directors for the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. And you can find him on Twitter at @eWydera. And Nick and I asked Alex and Eric to speak today about the power and perils of social media, because especially in an area like ours, where you're working with in a very specific area, the intersection of aging, serious illness, palliative medicine, and incarceration or criminal justice involvement, where there's a small community of people who are working in this space, and where there's a lot of conversation on sort of social media about areas that are potentially overlapping or of interest. It seems like a real opportunity, but also a potentially dicey place to be stepping into with our research and our interests. So we're really excited to hear from you both, and thanks so much for joining us at the Arch Network.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Eric. I was going to say Alex. We're going to kind of co-present this together. I would say too that this is a small group. We'd love people's thoughts and experiences on this too. We have some exercises. We have some slides, but it's okay to completely go off the slides and just talk about our experiences too. So you're welcome to join us on video too, ask questions, or put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with. And we're going to try to make this a group exercise. So we're going to start off with, why aren't you on social media from a professional standpoint?
And that's distinct from like being on social media to keep in touch with family, friends. Time. Yeah, the time it takes to be on social media. Like, you already are crunched for time trying to do all the other stuff you have to do. How are you going to make time to be on social media? Jarman says, it's a stressful space. Sure can be. And one of the things Eric and I were reflecting on as we were preparing for this talk today is that it's probably a more stressful space that you're in than we're in. I mean, we were reflecting that the only time that we have been trolled in social media was after the podcast Bree mentioned earlier with Bree and Eric Maserati and with Anand. I mean, we got hundreds of comments on Facebook that were just terrible. And that never happens with never happened with any of our other posts. So it's all the more stressful given criminal justice issues that you are interested in. Feels like extra time, too busy. Feels risky to put ideas out there when you're early in your career. Safety, primarily trying to avoid embarrassing myself. I always believed it only for social. It was only for social networking. Somebody seconding Jelane's early in the career comment. Scared of saying something that may hurt our future recruitment and career, since recruiters do look at Twitter profiles now. That is true. I was asked by a foundation to vet one of the Twitter feeds of an applicant. That was a new experience. Appearing too political or radical in ways that turned some off and may detract, etc.
Man, those are a lot of reasons not to join on social media.
Yeah, a place
Um,
where nuance and context of research is lost or distorted. Yeah, you work so hard, let's say to this big research study, you write a 5,000 word article, you trim it down to 3,000 words, and you publish it, and then they ask you to, well, can you condense this into a tweet? That's what we do at Jags. We ask you to give us a tweet with the headline. And then Eric will sometimes use that tweet that you submit, and other times come up with his own. So yeah, you can't have that nuance and context in something that's Twitter length.
so other things that we came up with: threats to professionalism, threats to patient confidentiality in the healthcare field, threats to patient clinician boundaries if you're a healthcare provider, fake news and propagation of inaccurate information. And like you said, there's a time sink. I love this cartoon. Are you coming to bed? I can't. This is important. What? Someone was wrong on the internet. I gotta fix that. So a lot of potential reasons to be not on social media from a professional standpoint. We'd love to address those and address some of the reasons Alex and I use social media, both from a what we're doing with our blog and our podcast, but also from a journal perspective, from Journal of American Geriatric Society. And again, love to have an open discussion. So if you have thoughts on this, unmute yourself, please join in and talk, or just throw it in the chat box. So we're going to start off with promotion. Love to hear, when you hear the word like self-promotion, which is, I think, one of the reasons people don't go on like social media. Like, I feel icky, promoting myself or my journal article I just wrote, or this thing that I feel passionate about. What's your reaction to the word self-promotion?
Bragging. Yeah.
Yuck.
Not
Not
humble.
humble.
Icky.
Icky.
Yeah.
Great. I think most of us have this feeling that I love that, almost inevitable, necessary, but uncomfortable. I liked, so Louise Aronson, one of our faculty members here at UCSF, she gave a talk a while ago, and I still think about it to this day. And she talked about the use of self-promotion in a more positive way, and that's using ourselves to promote the things that we care about. To recognize that if we don't join the conversation is going to be made without us, or potentially not happen at all. And just think back to Alex's point. Alex, how long does it take for like a research article from inception to publication? How many years?
Yeah, two would be a short time frame. 3 would be more normal. And often I find that after I've published an article, it comes out and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, what did I do in that study? Let's say a reporter calls and they want to talk about it. I'm like, oh, wow, I have to reread it. I don't even remember, it was so long ago.
Yeah, so that's one of the big challenges too. So when we're doing this, is recognizing that we're spending years potentially on a project, and it may be not a research article or something else that we're passionate about, and spending a little bit of extra time just to make sure people see it, that it's just not lost in the ether, is incredibly important. And I think this was what Louise Aronson was talking about, is really using ourselves to promote the things that we're passionate about. So we're going to give an example, and this is an example of a article that came out in Annals of Internal Medicine. It was a position paper on reducing firearm injuries and deaths in the United States, a position paper from the American College of Physicians. So this was published a couple of years ago, back in 2018. Does anybody remember what happened after this was published? An organization called the NRA picked it up and said someone should tell self-important anti-gun doctors to stay in their lane. Half of the articles in Annals of Internal Medicine are pushing for gun control. Most upsetting, however, the medical community seems to have consulted no one but themselves. Whew. Yeah, I see. Was this the stay in your lane comment? It was absolutely the stay in your lane comment. So it could have just ended there. NRA could have had the final voice. There could have been a lot of discussion about, doctors staying in our lane and the importance of us staying in our lane. But that didn't happen. What happened was a bunch of people started tweeting about it. So this is one: I held a 22-year-old's heart and used my hand to pump blood through a bullet-riddled body. We resuscitated this person for nearly an hour and they made it to the OR, but would never make it home to their family. Tell me, whose lane is this, NRA? Hashtag this is our lane. Hey, NRA, want to see my lane? Here's the chair where I sit on when I tell parents and kids are dead. How dare you tell me I can't research evidence-based solution? Hashtag this is my lane. This is my lane. This is our lane. Hashtag the quiet room. And it didn't end there. Then it also went into more traditional academic routes. So this is, sorry about that. My phone off. Alex, continue while I try to stop my phone from ringing. Oh, there we go. This is at New England Journal of Medicine. Hashtag this is our lane. Firearm safety and healthcare's highway. I think this is the first time New England Journal actually published a tweet. And it's the same tweet that I showed you earlier.
Yeah. And this is right. One of the reasons Alex. We thought this would be a good example, and this continues on here with Emmy Betts, who we've had on our podcast. She's wonderful, University of Colorado, Denver. She, there's our podcast. One of the reasons this is relevant is because of the controversial nature of this topic, and because of the controversial nature of the topic that you're all engaged in, criminal justice reform. And she is an example of how to do this thoughtfully, put yourself out there. And, she's on Twitter. I don't know, probably more than we are actually, but she's very good about, as I know Bree has been, engaging with the criminal justice community and giving very thoughtful responses, and not engaging with the trolls who inevitably troll her, right, left and right. You could imagine, given the nature of this topic, right?
And I would say this too. She does a nice job. So she is also in this New England Journal piece of marrying both traditional routes of publication, including this annals piece, with more non-traditional, whether it be podcasts or Twitter, just getting her voice out there and being part of that discussion. I love this quote: if we don't help shape the discussion, it will be shaped without us. And I think Emmy is a good example of somebody who helps shape the discussion around these vital, important issues.
Yeah, Diane Meyer is another quote that I'm going to skewer. Oh boy, I shouldn't even try.
Try it, Alex.
I can't. If you're not on the menu, then you're going to be what's for dinner.
I think if
you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Good, close though.
You don't want to be on the menu, Alex. So we're going to do another exercise, and either in the chat, or if you're feeling courageous, jump on video, audio, and tell us one sentence about an idea that you have and you want to advocate for, and either put in the chat or tell us live on video.
While folks are doing that, I had a question related to the last comment about discussions, but I'm curious of your all's thoughts about folks who really suggest that, well, it's not really a discussion on Twitter, and most people take very extreme positions, and it sort of things kind of get very quickly devolve into this Twitter war, so to speak. And so how much would you say there's actually meaningful dialogue where people actually are open enough and receptive enough via tweet versus other sort of more traditional ways of engaging folks. So I'm just curious about that because it's one thing that comes up, engaged, not engaged, that's the question. And how much, so yes, the discussion, the conversation is going to happen, but is it really a dialogue, a discussion, something that can sort of be broader, or is it some people just preaching to the choir in terms of people that are like-minded and maybe on one extreme or the other? Just curious your all's thoughts about that.
My thoughts are on that is that I think it depends a little bit on the topic. So if you're in a very highly polarized topics, like masks for COVID-19, you're probably not going to convince anybody on a Twitter thread a whole lot if you're having an argument about it. It's just not a great venue for that. It's like using email to try to convey something. The tone and the nuance is often lost. I think if it's about less polarizing issues, less emotional issues, you can actually have a really great discussion online and think about the nuances if there's not a lot of emotions around it. I think the hard part is little Twitter headlines doesn't help with when these things are highly emotional. We know we have to address the emotion in the room, and that's really hard to do via a tweet or any type of writing. I don't know what your thoughts are, Alex.
I mean, I think people take different approaches to this, and the way I've heard this best expressed was a podcast with Ezra Klein and Tressie October. I can't remember her name. They were talking about how some conversations are better suited to, podcasts, for example, where you can have a back and forth dialogue in real time and talk things through. And others are the sort of thing that you could manage to have on Twitter, but those are kind of rare. And that I personally, I use Twitter more for putting out ideas, links to articles that I find interesting or content that I find interesting, for supporting work of my trainees, promoting people who I'm mentoring in their work, or people in our group, or people nationally or internationally who I want to support and promote. I tend to not engage when people present like strong counter arguments that are clearly backed by a particular ideology that I'm just there's no way that I'm going to convince this person, otherwise. And responding is only going to bring more attention to them. So that's kind of how I think about it. I don't use it as a battleground to engage with others. I know some people do, but that's just not the way I've approached it.
Would love to hear other people's thoughts on this call about this.
I've actually had the similar thoughts as what Nick was just saying, was just, because the way I manage social media is I have my personal accounts on Facebook and Instagram, and then all my professional stuff is on Twitter. But if you look at who my Twitter followers are, they're either dementia-based researchers in either neurology or geriatrics, or they're like health law lawyers, which is basically when I put stuff out there, it's more or less preaching to the choir. And so I have found that I'm doing sort of what you guys are talking about, is using, and specifically Alex, using it either to promote colleagues' work and or making sure that my articles are getting out there to the kind of people that I want to make sure see them. And I think that was particularly important when I was trying to think about changing institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, one of the things that we think about too, and we'll talk about this later, is, the idea of self-promotion can be really hard. Like, I don't want to promote my own article or make it seem like I'm not humble, or it just feels icky. So, early on, as a division in geriatrics here at UCSF, we actually really had a big push to get people online on Twitter to actually not just for their self-promotion, but to kind of buddy up in a way to promote each other's work, and to have the division itself have a Twitter handle, Facebook, to actually to have the division promote everybody's work and everybody else promoting everybody else's work. So it's less about just us promoting ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
but us promoting the amazing things that our colleagues are doing. And I think it's worked out really well. I think we have one of the largest faculty Twitter accounts out there, and our division continues to put out tweets, and it's kind of nice when they mention kind of you on it and our junior faculty members.
I see Bree tweeted David Cloud's article, and he didn't even retweet it.
David.
I'm here. I'm on Twitter moratorium. I don't know. And I use Instagram. I don't really use Facebook much, but I don't really have the greatest reasons for it. I think most of it's time. And then I'm just one of those people that would feel like sucked into responding to like people I don't agree with. And it's just like, it's a psychological time suck. It's not productive. And I feel like so many people are just on there just to like get that little blast of dopamine. Like it is such a self-promotion space that I don't know, it feels like I'm wasting my time. But I'm still waiting to be convinced that I'm wrong, because I think I am wrong on some of this for sure. This is illuminating a little bit for me. And I guess it's also
continue
like
to try and convince you, but your concerns are so legitimate. I mean, especially if you're the type of person who can get sucked into those sort of debates.
Yeah. It's that nuance thing too. I think, being with Amend, we do a lot of work on like prison conditions, and those are very like contentious political issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so we work in a space that I think is intentionally kind of hidden. And so I think coming out with our work, we can get attacked by, people who just really come at these issues from a purist ideological perspective. And it's those people you agree with, it's people that it could just be it's daunting. I'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta say too, around the time sync issue, like there are periods of time where I don't tweet a lot from a professional standpoint, and there are times where I'm much more on it, and it fluctuates like whether I'm on service, how busy I'm doing other things, and recognizing that you can't do everything. I also tweet for our journal, American Geriatric Society, and that one I'm constantly doing. So pretty much every day or every other day I do that. But I feel like that's kind of separate than my own Twitter profile, and that's again trying to promote the things that other people are doing and get the word out there. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Alex, you want to talk a little bit about what's in the chat regarding one sentence? Yeah,
so some great ideas in the chat that people want to promote. Criminal justice, let's see. Oh, so many. All prison healthcare professionals should be required to get basic training in geriatrics and palliative care. Refugees are welcome. Criminal justice policies related to health should be vetted by healthcare professionals before being finalized, like compassionate release and medical parole. Training criminal attorneys to identify clients with dementia is critical to protecting individual rights and promoting health-related outcomes. Controlling drugs advertisements on social media. More space available for geriatric patients to be released after incarceration, right? Geriatric friendly spaces. Yeah, that's good. These are great ideas, and I guess the question is, how could we Eric, should we ask them to take this the next step?
It's up to you, Alex.
Like, if you were to write a tweet about this, I mean, many of these are already Twitter length. Let's just take one for an example. Anyone have one that we want to nominate?
I'm going to do Fernando's. More spaces available for geriatric patients to be released to after incarceration.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I'm just thinking of a few things about Twitter and how you would design a tweet in order to advocate for this position. One is that tweets with images attract far more attention than tweets without images. So, for example, you could start with a tweet with an image of, a very geriatric, unfriendly setting that older adults are discharged to after release from prison. And then you could have the second pointer, if you're interested in using Twitter, is that threads attract more attention than a single tweet. So if you can then just respond to your own tweet, you've started a thread. And you could respond to your own tweet with some information about geriatric syndromes, falls, etc., after release from prison, how common these are. And then something in terms of, more spaces available for patients to be released to, what would those ideal spaces look like as a third tweet to follow on? That's a kind of, off the top of my head, a way to think about writing a Twitter thread that advocates for that position.
Yeah, and it's kind of like writing an editorial for like a newspaper or something. Like you gotta hook the audience in to reading more. Like what's the hook here? How do you get people interested in reading the rest of the thread? And in part, that's also using visuals, so like a good picture. Also letting people know that it's a thread that you're going to continue on in that discussion. I'm probably not starting off with just a bunch of data to start off with. That's generally not a great place to start as far as getting people interested, but just a really good headline to get people interested in it. And it's also okay when you have that picture, is that you can tag people to get some interest in that thread early on. Wouldn't overdo hashtags. Like when you see 16 hashtags on a tweet, it's really hard from a visual perspective to get interested in that tweet. 1 or 2 hashtags is fine, but I wouldn't overdo it with the hashtags. And also the other thing too is using URLs to get, if you want to learn more, and thinking about like a social media ecosystem. So like if you have a blog, you can write more about it on a blog than you can on a Twitter thread, and people can learn more. Like Alex and I do podcasts, link to that podcast to learn more. So those are all potential ways to, and this is just one example of using Twitter. We don't want to advocate that Twitter is the only one to use. There's lots of other ways to get messages out there, from TikTok to Facebook. I wouldn't overdo it yourself. You only have so much time. Choose one platform to try it out and to advocate the things that you care about.
And Breeze just put a brilliant example of a tweet into the chat. Prisons have become nursing homes filled with #older adults who have the lowest rates of recidivism. It's time to fund safe, age-friendly places for older adults to be released to after incarceration.
And my only feedback with here is, I think probably a couple too many hashtags. The way I think about hashtags is people are going to potentially find this tweet using that hashtag. Like I doubt anybody is searching for or putting in hashtag safe as a thread. It's one way to potentially call out like a really important word because it makes it stand out. But the problem is once you have 5 hashtags, it doesn't stand out anymore. It just makes it a little bit harder to read. So like if age friendly is, and I don't think it is a hashtag term because of the hyphen, so it'd just be age. I'd pick out the important ones, and those are generally the ones that people actually use. And I'm hearing is there a way to know how many mentions a hashtag has been used in? Yeah, you just go to that search box in Twitter and type in the hashtag age-friendly and see what comes up. If the last time somebody tweeted about it was 16 years ago at the dawn of Twitter, probably, unless you want to make it a new one and get people really interested in it, probably not a great one to use.
I just want to cut it. Sorry, Amy Byers, you had your hand up, but did you post your question in the comment? Is that
Yeah,
your?
I did. I have,
Okay.
there's some noise in the background. They're doing some yard work in back here. So I ended up posting my question. Yeah, I just was curious if you guys recommend actually stating I just got on Twitter because the JAMA Psych basically required it. And I was like, I do not want to do this because I like one of those diehards who's like, I just want to do the research. I don't want to worry about all the social media stuff. But I'm realizing more and more it's beneficial too to how you do this. So I'm glad you guys are doing this. This is great. Thank you.
Yeah, more and more journals are making it like a really important part of the
They
publication cycle.
are. It's like I couldn't get around it. It's like they really were like, you need to do this kind of thing. And I was senior author and I was like, I better do this. I better do this. But I think that's the last time I got on Twitter was set up that account. And so I'm in the crowd of like, please convince me that this, because I really feel like the time sink aspect, like I have so many things to do and so many things I'm juggling, and I'm getting busier and busier as I'm becoming more and more senior.
Sure.
And so I'm just like, how do I do this? I want to hire somebody just to do it for me. And so I do wonder though, when you do these tweets, do you actually need, I mean, do you advise saying like, this is the purpose of this, like not, like saying, I want to get people's opinion on this, or do you just like make a statement and then do all these hashtags?
I wouldn't advocate for doing a lot of hashtags. I think being clear, like if you look at a lot of people who tweet a lot, they're not like throwing 16 hashtags in there. Most of them nobody ever uses, so be careful. I would say it depends on the purpose of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to get people interested, or you have a mentee who just published something, maybe just calling out that person's work is what you want to do, and you call it out. If you're actually interested in getting people engaged with your tweet, asking, like you said, like, I want to hear people's opinion. But if you do a tweet like, I want to get folks' opinion, that's not one of those where you can't not be also engaged in that tweet. So when people do give you an opinion, you got to reply back. It can't just be, oh, I want people engaged, but I'm going to ignore everything that they say. So be honest also with what you're trying to do with the tweet, both for yourself and to others. And recognizing that engagement is actually, there's a lot of fun sometimes with it if it's directed towards the right people. And part of that too is potentially, as you move more senior, with your mentees, really trying to promote their work. And we talk about that little dopamine rush. Give them that little dopamine rush that somebody is really advocating for them.
Yeah, just to build on that, and then we're going to get to Andrea's comment in the chat. The reason that these journals are so intent on you being on Twitter is that journalists are on Twitter. Journalists love Twitter. And the best way to get exposure is for a journalist in the lay press, the regular press, to pick this up, the regular media via social media. So social media is like the vehicle that leads to the journalist saying, hey, this is really interesting. I want to write about this. Because we interviewed Paula Spann, who's, writes the New Old Age column for the New York Times. She was a guest on our podcast. And she said every journalist at the New York Times is on Twitter. Every single one. They love it because it's like, headline length stuff. They can just quickly scroll through and find things that are interesting. And if there are a lot of people tweeting, if there's a lot of birds singing the same song, then, oh, that must be interesting. I should read about that.
Yeah, and I got to say, like, if a journalist picks up your stuff, by all means, your job is to help publicize that, both so it helps with your publication or whatever you're interested, what you're advocating for, but also that they'd want to come back to it. If an article, hits the top 10 in the New York Times, like downloads or reads, there's potentially more interest to write another article about it in the future versus one that like 3 people have read it. It's kind of probably they're not gonna push for that type of article in the future. It's about the eyeballs too. So really being a colleague with the journalist, trying to promote things that you care about, and also promoting their work can help them in the future.
I want to get to Andrea's comment. I would like to hear your thoughts on whether it's possible or beneficial to be on social media professionally a little bit, in quotes. I've been hesitant to get started because it feels like it's not worth it unless I'm going to be on there regularly with new content and thoughts. Eric, thoughts about this? Can you be on social media just a little bit?
I wax and wane with
professionally?
my social media presence. Sometimes I'm on it a lot. Sometimes I'm on it a little bit. And I think it's okay to be on it a little bit, to try it out, to even lurk in the beginning, post a couple things. And that's fine. I think that's probably how most people do it. And recognizing that it shouldn't be number one priority. It shouldn't take up all your time. I think about it is like when I have those little bits of time during the day that I don't want to use for other things, I actually use it to go on social media, promote the things that other people are doing, retweet something, or if I feel like it, publish my own tweet. And again, I use mainly Twitter from a professional standpoint. I use Facebook I don't really use much Facebook anymore. But I use that from a personal standpoint. Aside from our Jared Powell podcast, which we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, we use all of those platforms to promote like our blog posts and our podcasts.
Yeah, and I'd also just say, if you want to get started, Andrea and others, here are some places where you can get started. One is tweeting a national meeting. So, like, let's say a men throws a big meeting and brings people in criminal justice together, and you probably do that. Then you could tweet, some of the presentations. You could take a picture of a compelling slide and tweet a quote of what the person said. And that really and that's just a way to get in the habit of, promoting others' work, promoting messages that you resonate. And then you've got the image, and it's cutting edge usually. And then you can also like tag, for example, amend. You could do a hashtag, criminal justice reform or something. There probably is one like that. So that's one opportunity. A second is, at those national meetings, there are often people presenting posters. And I have to say, some of the most grateful people are when you like take a picture of somebody's poster, and they're not necessarily like somebody in your group, your academic circle, but they're somebody you don't know that well, but their poster is really compelling and interesting, and you take a picture of them with their poster and it goes out on Twitter. They're so grateful for that exposure, because otherwise they're just standing there like hoping somebody will see it, and suddenly it's elevated way beyond that. And then third would be if somebody you're working with publishes something like a mentee in particular, promote their work.
I will say I had an experience where so I use a little bit of Instagram with family, and there's this like fabulous photo of my daughter doing something like engaged in this like political thing. And so I took a picture and I put it on Instagram, but by mistake I put it on Twitter. And I didn't look at it again. And when I looked at my phone, anyway, there were 5,000 retweets within an hour, and I panicked and I took it down. But the nice thing is then it's down. And then then I've like searched it and like you can't find it. So I do feel like there are ways to pull some things back. I mean, if somebody obviously takes a picture of your tweet and then retweet, but nobody was doing that. They were just reacting to it. And so it was good to feel like I could have pulled something back that I didn't mean to put there by mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also, because I do the same, it sounds like we do the same thing, Bree, is I don't put pictures of my family on my professional account. Including my kids. I just I do that on Facebook for my personal restricted account, but also thinking about setting your own boundaries. So like, what do you feel comfortable with? What do you feel comfortable with sharing? And recognizing that, yes, you can delete something, but like Bree said too, somebody can take a screenshot. There's National Library of Congress, I think actually downloads tweets, and at least they used to.
They catalog all tweets.
So just recognize that we don't want to say there's no risk to doing this either. So being mindful, and that's usually me. What I do is I pause and I think to myself, like, would I do this on a crowded hospital elevator? Would I say this thing? And that's kind of my litmus test of it's okay to post it. Like it could be something that's somewhat controversial. And would I be okay doing that? And I also would advocate, don't be anonymous on Twitter. Like there's no such thing as anonymity. You can figure it out. And it kind of loses the point. And it also loses the, you coming from kind of what you do, you bring a lot of potential authority and people want to listen to you. And you lose that being anonymous.
Mm-hmm. Somebody in the chat, Jarman is asking, anyone recommend TikTok to reach newer, younger audiences? And Andrea's commenting, and one of her RAs is a TikTok star. Probably not professionally, I'm assuming, Andrea. But I don't, it's a mix. I don't know anything about TikTok. I did hear a really compelling podcast about how Snapchat is a good space for some of these discussions, and it reaches like a huge swath of people who are 10 to 30, like 90% or some huge number. So there are compelling reasons. We have not ventured there.
I would say this is that it's figure out what works for you and what you're willing to try. And being on a lot of different venues for different people being on different venues, I wouldn't do them all yourself, is a good idea. And like we actually started podcasting 2016 because like it was a space that we weren't using. We wanted to give it a try. Alex then gave like a talk to medical students and somebody asked them like, are you on YouTube? Is that right, Alex?
Yeah. I thought, hey, we're cool. We have a podcast and a blog. And they looked and they're like, but are you on YouTube? It's like, no. And they're like, oh, psh. So now we're on YouTube. But we have
one
not
day
yet
we're probably on
into
TikTok, but it's probably going to be like
Snapchat.
10 years after kids use it and they're done with it by the time we're on it, which is fine. They're going to move on to other newer platforms. And again, you don't have to do everything here. I actually think it's who you're trying to reach. If you're trying to reach a bunch of researchers, probably not TikTok. If you're trying to reach a younger audience, then it may be a great avenue to do that.
If you're trying to recruit subjects who are younger, then yeah, TikTok, Snapchat.
Not Facebook. Yeah, they're definitely not on that. All right. So maybe let's continue.
Oh, go ahead. You have a question.
Well, I just was gonna, sorry, I was just curious about, sometimes you mentioned sort of boundaries, and especially when people use social media in both their professional and personal lives, sometimes there is sort of spillover, it's not sort of nice, neat and packaged, if we're, especially a lot of us that are doing criminal justice work, we're not always just doing that sort of 9 to 5 or thinking about that 9 to 5. And maybe some of that is, so I don't know if there are recommendations about how you sort of set up these parameters, or if something you do professionally can then somehow people start kind of tracking you on your personal social media. And so how do you set up those good boundaries where, okay, this is when I use this for just this stuff that relates to my 9 to 5 academic job, whatever, and then this is everything else?
I have separate accounts. So I have like a Facebook account. That's my personal Facebook account. That's where I put pictures, biking pictures, and family pictures when my kids will give me permission to post them on Facebook, which is rarer these days. We also have a Jerry Pal podcast and blog account, and that only publishes, our podcast these days. So it's separate accounts. There's no blending there. Some people, and on Twitter, that's where I reside professionally. I don't post biking photos on Twitter. So yeah, I just keep them separate. Now, some people blur the line, like Ken Kavinsky, who you may know is, researcher in Division of Geriatrics. he will post baseball stuff about the Cubs on Twitter because that's his passion, his personal passion. That works. That's fairly non-controversial. Most people don't post family images on Twitter.
And I would say this too is I think everybody is different, and trying to figure out kind of where your boundaries are, what you feel comfortable with. And for me personally, like I don't post about my kid on my professional account, mainly because I also want to respect his privacy. And also, I do think it's a lot about promotion and self-promotion, using ourselves to promote other people's work and the great things. And then I have to question myself, like, why am I using my child for this particular thing? So that's just my boundaries, how I think about it from a professional standpoint. But I agree, the lines do blur, especially when family potentially is part of the things that we're advocating for. How do we think about that? Where should our boundaries be driven? There's a lot of discussion about, especially in medicine, around what does professionalism look like on social media, and where are those boundaries? And is it this old standard around professionalism, or is it kind of we have to rethink professionalism in the modern age? I see another comment. I try to leave my institution name and specifics regarding my career on my personal page, particularly Insta. I also think too, this just also brings up is, I do think it's also important around disclosures. Like if you have conflicts of interests, and I think we're seeing this more and more, especially with pharma dollars, is people are advocating for specific interventions, but also maybe getting money from that pharmaceutical company. So there is an inherent conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest. I'm in favor of disclosing it. I wish these social media sites had better ways to disclose potential conflicts of interests. There isn't a great one, but if you're going to be advocating for something that you have potential to be making money, or you've made money on it, I do think it's worthwhile to think about how you're going to disclose that.
Yep, Eric got in a Twitter battle with a couple of physicians, and then he looked them up, and they were funded by the pharmaceutical company that they were whose position they were advocating for.
Yeah. And Alex told me, why didn't you post a tweet about that and show that they've done this? And I'm like, I'm kind of done with this Twitter war.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to move on. And the discussion kind of ended.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I still think about that, about, where should our disclosures be?
Mm-hmm. It would have been very reasonable to simply ask them to reveal their own disclosures on Twitter. Okay, should we continue on?
Yeah, let's continue on. We're not going to go through all these. I don't think we have time, but I just want to talk about dissemination. We've already talked about this too. So this is the number of articles referenced in PubMed from 1953 to 2018. The number continues to increase. It's over 2 million right now. The last time I checked, and you can see that it's just skyrocketing. So even if you publish a paper, Alex, what are the odds somebody's going to read it?
Yeah, there was one study that suggested that the average number of readers of any article on average that's published is 3. It's really sad.
And that
may be
includes our
wrong, but
parents,
it's not.
or it doesn't include our parents?
Yeah, exactly. Include your parents. So it's some low number.
So really thinking about it, go ahead.
No, I was just saying my parents won't read mine.
So Alex and I are part of the Journal American Geriatric Society, and this is a little before and after. So we started our social media focus mid 2016, and that included making sure that we had Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, Instagram accounts, that all of our articles had color figures associated with it, like, which seems like a simple thing, but actually kind of complicated. But we used to actually charge people for a color figure, so we never got color figures. So we changed that policy. We started asking people for tweets beforehand, what their Twitter handles are, kind of what we heard from like Gemma Psych, like, give me your Twitter handle, and you got to write a tweet before we publish this, or a sample tweet. And what we saw is these are alt metric stores. It was just the amount of attention that any of our publications got. Again, that there's over time, this number is just going to increase because more people are using social media. But we found a pretty significant bump with kind of retooling our entire social media strategy, and part of it just being on social media. And what
And
we
you can
actually
see
found,
it's not just the Twitter that improved. You can see that articles in regular news increased. And that's, I think, it's hard to say causality in a before and after study. Don't put your researcher hat on, but I think this is likely because of all the tweets that generated enthusiasm in the lay press for writing about these articles.
and I gotta say, before we did this, hashtag geriatrics was not a great place to hang out on Twitter. It included mostly jokes about older adults using hashtag geriatrics. Now, if you go to hashtag geriatrics, it's actually it's a lot of stuff coming out from JAGs, but others too around aging and older adults, and not a place just to deride older adults and make fun of them. So also reclaiming a hashtag and making it yours, I think it's possible, and I think that shows it. And again, where people get information, they get in a lot of places. There's too many articles, so some places like Journal Watch brings them all together. I like reading blogs still too. This is a BMJ blog that I really like to follow to see what other people are doing. And it's not very hard to do a blog. Alex and I also do podcasts. And I think for some people, it's a way to get information. This is our podcast, the Jerry Pell podcast. We are, I think, like at 197 podcasts right now. And each one gets about 5,000 to 6,000 listens, which is, for a geriatrics and palliative care community, that's bigger than a plenary session at our national meetings, each of these podcasts. So
double.
Double the size of a plenary session at a national meeting. So it's not, we're not in like NPR podcast domain, but it's a small audience that we're trying to focus on healthcare professionals interested in geriatrics and palliative care. This was our setup before COVID. This is our setup now afterwards. We're using Zoom, and it makes it actually really easy to do. We did do one on COVID-19 in prisons. Alex mentioned this earlier. Encourage anybody who's interested to check it out. Just to Google Jerry Pell COVID-19 in prisons. It'll be the first thing that comes up. With a great song by Eric Maserati, by the way. Alex usually does our songs, but this one he gave to Eric.
Oh yeah, Eric's a better musician by far.
And you can see that initially when we started the podcast, we were kind of podcasting to ourselves, but over time, it's increased and increased as far as number of plays of our Jerry Pell podcasts. Other great podcasts out there too. So I really encourage people like Ear Hustle. And you can start your own too. So we have a guide on how to create your own podcasts. And I think it's just a great way to get out there. So my last question is, would love to hear from you about podcasts that you like or should be out there. So either in the comment section or on video, share it with us. Other podcasts besides Ear Hustle and obviously Jerry Pell.
Or is there a new podcast that should be out there? Should Bree be podcasting? She's gone, but that means that you can make up a podcast for her. Assign it to her.
Life Jolt. Love Life Jolt.
Let's check that one out.
Lauren or Andrea, do you want to give us like a one sentence about what Life Jolt is?
It's Canadian, but it's still pretty relevant. They're a little bit better about their corrections than we are. But it's just nice to hear from the women's side. I mean, I love Ear Hustle. I'm sure many of us do, but it's really refreshing to hear a lot of that. And so much of it is relationship focused, and it's just good stuff. So I recommend it.
Yeah. And I think this is another thing, is that you can either have your own podcast or you can promote other people's podcasts that are really important. So this would be another use of social media to promote Life Jolt, like making a tweet and really encouraging other people to listen to it. And it's a way to promote the things that we care about. Nice. Yeah, a little bit of homework there.
Good.
And it doesn't have to be a tweet again. It could be a Facebook post. It could be a TikTok video. It could be anything. Don't do all of them. Just choose one.
Yeah. And we'd love to see examples of people using TikTok or Snapchat. That's the next frontier, I think.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
If you all don't mind. So one reason that I'm scarred for life from academic Twitter is a couple years ago, probably 2 years ago, I don't have children, but somehow Parent Magazine tweets got in my feed or whatever. And this, well, I know how it got there actually, but this author had written this whole piece about being antisocial and how it's really hard being a parent. He meant antisocial in the layperson way of introverted and shy. But this, like the title was antisocial, like everything was antisocial. So I like, okay, this is my job as a psychologist, a forensic psychologist, to be like, that's not what anti means. And I thought I was friendly about it, and he flipped out. And then everyone was like, he said he's antisocial. Like, why are you making him more anxious? And I was just like, I feel like you should have some responsibility if you're telling everybody this in terms of the journalist. But like, is that like a major no-no? Because I feel like part of our job is to like dispel lay people things that are incorrect.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, right? Is people may have an emotional reaction to what you tweet about. And we're going to feel either, enraged or like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? So we're going to potentially have an emotional reaction. I think Twitter is a terrible place. Like it engages emotions, but you can't have a discussion about emotions very well on Twitter. And I would say that the part of it also is recognizing, okay, when am I done with this conversation? When has it gone too far? Or I don't want to be engaged in it anymore. And part of that, you could just kind of walk away. It's kind of like if something happened on the street and somebody started yelling at you, are you going to engage or are you going to walk away? And I think it's okay to walk away, especially when somebody has an outsized reaction to something that we think, wait, that wasn't very, I wasn't coming at it from a confrontational standpoint. I've screwed up too online. I've done tweets where I think I was a little bit more controversial, or maybe a little bit too not condescending. I'm not sure what the right word is. I've never deleted a tweet, but I've actually reached out to people, have talked to them about it, and also recognize kind of making sure that I'm not part of that problem of wanting to be controversial to get more engagement with my tweets, but recognizing that I may not actually be contributing to a good discussion about what's going on. And I think having some ownership too, like where am I falling on this spectrum of the type of person I want to see on Twitter? Am I that type of person, or am I just, and I think the hard part is Twitter and Facebook and everything promotes controversial, and you can get in this loop of being more and more controversial, and kind of losing our way. And I think recognizing when we gotta dial it back and listening to potentially some of that feedback, even when it's potentially hard to hear.
I think that is a great way to end our segment. Thank you both. We're a couple minutes over, so I really appreciate you all being gracious and giving us even extra time. Thank you, Eric and Alex. And you might have some additional converts. And of course, when we all launch podcasts, we'll send them your way to tweet to the universe.
Great.
All right. Thank you
thanks,
all
everybody.
again. All
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Bye.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Take care.